Welcome to another episode of the Restaurant Confidential Bulletin podcast. Today we've got three prominent and influential fixtures in California's public policy and political arena. Brian Maas, president of the California New Car Dealers Association, Dave Puglia, president and CEO of the Western Growers Association, and last and certainly not least, Jennifer Barrera, president and CEO of the California Chamber of Commerce, which I think most people agree is the 800-pound gorilla in California representing businesses. So thanks all for joining. Appreciate the time.
Glad to
Thanks
be
for
here.
having me.
Okay, so texted you all before this. I just thought, the restaurateurs, especially, when you're talking about sort of the challenges that, we're all facing sort of, as individual sort of industries, and of course, the broader sort of viewpoint from Jennifer's perspective on the state of the industry. Why don't you just, like, Brian, give us a snapshot of the state of the new car dealers in California, the state of the industry. What are they seeing out there?
It's been a wild ride in 2025. When the year started, we were facing an existential zero emission vehicle mandate. We weren't sure our dealers were going to have inventory to sell by summer due to action by the federal government, and actually based on a public affairs campaign that we launched. We convinced CARB to back off enforcement of ACC 2, the zero emission vehicle mandate rules. That was great news for our industry. It meant we could sell the cars that customers want to buy. Then the federal government ended EV tax credits. So we had a rush of sales in August and September, people rushing to dealerships to get EVs. EV sales skyrocketed. What that means for October, November, and December, though, is EV sales are going to plummet, and it's going to take a while to figure out what the right size of the EV market is going to be. And then, our friends in the legislature weren't shy about regulating our businesses. And in the car dealer world, there's a major bill that the governor signed last week that we're going to have to implement over the next 9 months before it takes effect. And it's going to change the car buying process for dealers and their customers. So a lot going on in the car dealer world.
Yeah. What are you seeing or hearing from them just on the economy and how that's impacting sales? Because, in restaurant world, when the economy starts to soften, and I couch this economy as a nervous economy. Consumers start to dial back and then they trade down, so you stop eating at, very expensive restaurants, fine dining, and you trade down to maybe casual dining. Or if you're a casual dining customer and maybe, you're sort of a middle class or earner, you're trading down to, let's say, limited service. Are you seeing any of that in sort of the numbers your members are seeing?
Yeah, if you start reading sort of the economic data in the car world, folks are really nervous. The average price of a new car cleared $50,000 for the first time ever. That's just not affordable for the middle class. You're seeing pressure on subprime loan delinquencies. Those are credit challenged customers. They're having trouble holding on to their vehicles because they can't make the payments. So I think folks are a little nervous about what the future holds. And then on top of that, you have the uncertainty of tariffs that are either on or they're off or they're changing. So far, most manufacturers have absorbed those higher costs, but those days are coming to a close soon. And that's going to affect vehicle pricing and availability of vehicles that customers want to buy.
Yeah, and we're seeing that. We just did a survey of our industry just over the last month. We've been out doing the survey, and the numbers are coming back. And I'm seeing now, the tariffs seeping into their cost of goods. Obviously, if you're a restaurant that's serving, food and menu items where you're importing hams from, Italy or fish from Japan, these are all costs that they've got to figure out the end. the end of the line in the supply chain, and now you got to tell the consumer, the guest in the restaurant, what the price is, and they try to absorb it, but it's harder and harder to absorb when all of these cost pressures are ending up, all over the map. Dave, what are you seeing in the ag space? I would imagine you have a different set of challenges, but I'd probably hazard to guess that they're fairly similar to some of the challenges we're facing, particularly on immigration.
Some similar. I would say overall stressed. So we're a four-state organization: California, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico. And of the four states, and not surprisingly, the California members are the most stressed, and happy or unhappy to talk about why that is. But at a national level, Brian mentioned tariffs, and that has certainly hit our sector. We have a lot of our members export from the United States around the world. We have heavy export markets in Asia. We export actually more than any place else to Canada. And so with the upcoming revision of the U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement, we have a huge stake in that. We also have many members who operate not just in the United States, but grow and ship products, fresh produce products out of other countries: Mexico, South America, Asia. So we're very interconnected, and the trade tumult has been difficult to manage, no doubt about it. Brian mentioned supply chain headaches, and we've certainly been in the middle of that. But there's an upside to it. I think there has been more discussion around tariff levels, understandably, because it's easy to kind of focus on the numbers. What most people aren't really focused on, but we are certainly, and we have some insight with the administration around this, is that the Trump administration is focused not just on tariff levels, but on addressing non-tariff barriers to trade that have been plaguing our industry, and I suspect others as well, for a very, very long time. We have trading markets, export markets in Asia that I won't name the specific countries, but they're notorious for coming up with bogus reasons to block a shipment of fresh produce, say citrus from California, from entering their port based on a bogus claim of a pest being found on the cargo, and we know it wasn't there. And that's just to protect their domestic markets. And so I will say the administration seems very, very focused on non-tariff barriers. That's a positive. I'd say also on the positive side, whatever one may think of RFK Jr., the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement, affords a lot of opportunity for our industry, since we produce the foods that are highest in nutrient density. They're healthy, fresh foods that are not ultra processed. And so there's the national dialogue going around on food and nutrition, we think, is very, very positive potentially for our members down the line. In California, we have stresses that your members know very well, Jot, and labor is one of them. You mentioned it's not just cost of labor, it's availability of labor. It's really a national issue, but the cost of labor in California is exceedingly high. So we have not only a chronic shortage of labor in agriculture that worsens by the year, but in every state, especially in California, the cost of securing labor using guest worker programs, for example, has just skyrocketed. And there comes a point when the cost of production is simply too high for a grower in California to continue justifying growing that product in California when you can go someplace else with a lower cost of production. And that usually means going to Mexico or South America. We're trying to stop that, obviously, and a national solution on labor would be welcomed. And we fought for that alongside a lot of other people in the business community for a long time. But it's very hard to get Congress to act on anything these last, call it decades, but especially now. And so we're going to keep pushing, but in the meantime, we're looking for administrative relief on the guest worker program that agriculture uses, and the Trump administration delivered some very, very serious relief on that in the last couple of months. So mixed bag on labor, but we're fully aware that any change made administratively that is beneficial today can be overturned by the next administration in 3+ years. And so we really need Congress to finally get serious about the nation's labor needs, and especially if we believe that having a secure food supply domestically grown is an important element of our national security, then Congress needs to get off its rear end.
Yeah, yeah. Using Congress, the word Congress and the word serious in the same sentence is pretty unusual.
I'm
Yeah,
being diplomatic.
we're typically a labor challenge is for us finding qualified workers. I mean, certainly the number one pain point for restaurants, particularly in Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, is just sort of the pain point is like cost of labor. The fast rising cost of labor. It's hard to keep up. And then historically, finding available labor has been an issue. And then high turnover rate in the restaurant industry sometimes approaches 150%. Finding available labor is not even a top pain point right now for our industry because there's so much else that they're having to deal with, namely a reduction in customer traffic. In LA, for example, restaurant sales and real restaurant sales in LA in 2024 is at 2012 levels. I mean, that's extraordinary. So restaurants aren't looking to expand their empires and hire more employees. And so we're getting a lot of press calls from journalists fishing around for what's the impact of these immigration sweeps and ICE raids on your workforce. And there's so much distortion in restaurant world right now that it's hard to see the direct impact of that since they're not really looking for work. I was down in your neck of the woods last night, Dave, in Tustin for one of our Orange County chapter events, and I came back to my hotel room, flipped on KTLA, and I'd never seen this before, but they were showing footage of a restaurant employee who walked out the back door to empty a trash can into the trash bin, and there were two ICE agents waiting out there for him. And the footage showed him running with the trash bin and two ICE agents, grabbing him and cuffing him. So, we're in uncharted territory as an industry, but I think a lot of, business sectors are kind of bracing for what's going to happen. And our friends in DC are telling us they're hiring 10,000 ICE agents. They're not even fully staffed up. So fully expect it's going to get worse before it gets better. So
Yeah,
anyway,
so far our experience has been we've had a lot of member feedback as enforcement actions have taken place. Most of them have been in Ventura County, some in Kern County, some in Fresno County. And in each case, it's kind of been the same playbook. ICE is looking for a known felon or a couple of felons. They know where that person works, and they're going for them. They're not going for the other workers, many of whom we know are undocumented in our fields. The problem is when a crew of farm workers is harvesting celery in Oxnard, there are 25 in the crew, and suddenly a bunch of SUVs stop on the side of the field and a bunch of agents come tumbling out. Everybody runs. Well, what happens when you run away from a law enforcement officer? They're going to chase you down. And so they are all detained. Eventually, the feds find the felon or felons they were looking for, and everyone else has been released, even those who are here without documentation.
yeah,
But the problem is those workers, whether they're here legally or not, don't come back to work the next day or the day after or the day after that. And when we have, as we often do in my industry, a highly perishable crop in the field, when it's ready to be harvested, a lettuce product, leafy green product, celery, bell peppers, all kinds of different commodities that fall in the fresh produce category, that harvest window is very, very short. If those workers aren't there to harvest the crop in the 1 or 2 or 3 day window that you have, the crop will no longer be marketable and it's going to be plowed back in the ground at a huge loss. And so that's been the disruptive impact that we've seen to date. But again, I'll foolishly hold out hope for a national legislative solution and pinning a lot of that on the 4 times now, by my count, that the president in public settings has articulated a vision for ag labor reform that his instincts are good. He knows that there are workers who are essential in this country. He knows that farmers have essential workers that we should not gut from our economy, that would be catastrophic, and that we have to find a way to trust farmers to have the right people working on the farms, meaning violent felons, right? And provide a better guest worker program. He has said it 3 or 4 times in public now, and every time he does, his base goes after him for a few days. They get very upset. And then he comes back and he says it again. Tells me that he has an outcome in mind that, again, trying to decipher the way he speaks, because he doesn't speak in the same way we all do as professional advocates. But it's pretty clear he's talking about a solution that incorporates some sort of legal work status for our existing workforce, provided they haven't been committing other crimes, et cetera, and then a far improved guest worker program than what we have today. And if he could lead the way on Capitol Hill and create a safe pathway for his fellow Republicans to go down that line, we could actually see something historic happen. And again, I'm not going to hold my breath, but I have some optimism around that.
Yeah, I suspect that it will have to be his proposal, not Congress's, in order for them to get off the dime. And you're right, about sort of what you've seen. For all I know, this news story, they just covered this footage in the back parking lot. We have no idea who this person is or what the background of this person is. But, they were certainly focused on that individual when he came out that back door. Interesting. Thanks for that background and sort of state of the ag industry, Dave. Jennifer, so of course you represent everybody on this screen and then some, every conceivable business interest in California. So you're probably looking at it from 30,000 feet, but what are you seeing? What are you hearing from your members?
Yeah, similar things that have been raised by you, Jot, Dave, and Brian. I'll just jump in on the immigration discussion for a moment. Obviously, we know that the immigration population here in California is a significant part of our workforce, and these raids are disruptive. And obviously, Dave articulated very well how disruptive they can be in the ag industry when it's not just the individual that is ultimately detained, but it's the chilling effect that it has on the rest of the workforce. And that is something that is certainly applicable to all different industries who have seen this. It is the chilling effect of not showing up to work. It also is the chilling effect of just not going out, to frequent the restaurants, Jot, or to frequent the other shops. And so it does have a much broader economic impact on our communities other than just the individual who's being detained. I am certainly hopeful of some of the comments that were made that we can find a pathway, but even on that note, there's essential workers in all of these industries who've been working here, and hopefully, we can find that middle ground to eliminate this disruption and find that pathway to get there. But with regards to kind of the overall sentiment of the business community, I think it's a reflection of uncertainty. So you have uncertainty with regards to obviously the immigration issue, but there's uncertainty on the state politics and state policy versus the national politics and the national policy. And particularly, I'm sure it's because, we are the California Chamber of Commerce, but it feels like it is very focused here in California on a lot of the decisions that are being made between state and federal politics. And it is having, a significant impact on our members, their ability to operate and their costs. I would say the other big theme is affordability. And I know obviously you both, several of you have mentioned it, but the affordability issue is real here in California in particular. It's a reflection of a lot of things, a lot of decisions that have been made over years here in California that are now just starting to kind of reflect itself with regards to our cost of doing business. And also some of the national politics are not helping with that discussion, as we mentioned the tariffs. And so you hear from everybody that they are suffering with regards to affordability. Their inputs are going up. And that ultimately reflects higher prices for the consumers. And so it's this vicious cycle of businesses having their prices going up, and then of course the consumers feeling that impact here in California as well. So affordability and uncertainty are really kind of what I'm consistently hearing from our members.
Yeah. Speaking of which, remember at the beginning of this legislative session, the speaker gets up and gives a speech about, we hear you, we feel your pain, and we are going to, with a laser focus, address the affordability issue. What marks, this is just a question to all of you, what marks would you give the legislature in achieving that goal?
Okay, I'll jump in first. I don't know that I'll give them a particular grade, but one thing that I thought was most notable about this legislative session that has been something that has been discussed and debated years here in the legislature is CEQA reform. Everybody has talked about it. Jerry Brown called it, I believe, the Lord's work to try and reform CEQA. And this year we saw, obviously, the legislation go through that created a CEQA exemption for infill housing and advanced manufacturing. I don't know, that I was believing that something like that significant in the CEQA area would move forward through the legislature. But I would say it was pretty significant to have that big of a reform passed through the legislature. I will highlight that there is an issue with regards to a provision in that policy dealing with vehicle miles traveled and how that's applicable to the housing builders. But With that said, I mean, just the notion again of a CEQA exemption of that significance outside of a arena, sports arena or something like that was pretty big from an affordability perspective. That helps.
Yeah, and I think the relate action, right, with the cost of energy. I mean, I think the governor sort of drove them to that, but they ended up doing something they probably wouldn't otherwise have done, but for the governor. And so, yeah, so they're a good first step, right? I don't know, Dave, Brian, you got any observations about sort of the legislature and sort of how they're achieving
Well,
their vision?
I'll defer Brian pretty quickly though. I mean, just looking at it through my parochial lens, I'll give them an incomplete. I think there's an intent here. I haven't seen it manifest in any legislative product that affects the ag industry. We have incredibly high energy costs, fertilizer costs. I mean, just across the board. And a lot of that's driven by regulatory policy. And so if they really want to get serious about affordability and maintaining economic productivity in the private sector, you got to start unwinding many of the regulatory knots that they've tied around us in the last, I would say, 25 years. So here I'm even less optimistic than I was about immigration reform, but I'll be gracious and give them an incomplete since we're only halfway through the session.
That's fair, Brian.
Yeah, I was thinking the same word Dave came up with, incomplete. And I think from our perspective, there's a disconnect. We've been talking about affordability, and when you impose burdens on business, those are ultimately going to get passed on to consumers, whether it's vehicle purchasers or folks in the grocery store or people who come to restaurants. They're all going to pay the price in the end. And you can't assume that a new burden on car dealers, let's say, and again, I mentioned a major piece of legislation that's going to impose significant burdens on dealers, is not going to increase the price of cars, which, as I mentioned, are the highest ever. So I'm hopeful that some of the rhetoric catches up with some of the policies like secret reform and infill housing. But based on prior track record, I'm cautious.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, so the legislature, I think it was a third of the legislature this year is brand new. Function of term limits, and I believe the last election before this one that elected this new crop of legislators, same thing. I think it was about a third of the legislatures, and they have 2/3 of the legislature who are governing the state of California with less than 3 years experience. Some of them with a year under their belt. Have you seen is that having, I mean, we've been under term limits for many, many years, but I think this is the biggest class of, I'll use inexperienced, although many of them were supervisors or elected officials, but for purposes of the state policy, is this, are you seeing an impact on sort of the newness or the freshmanness of the legislature? I mean, I'll just say, this isn't my word, but I've heard very, very frustrated advocates from other sectors saying it's amateur, right? I mean, there needs to be some sort of, education that they go through about how the history of the legislature, the body of laws. They're not experts yet. And just when they become experts, they're turned out. I mean, do you have observations on that, or should I just move on to something else?
I think it's fair. I mean, I think it's fair, and it is, you know what I mean, challenging with regards to some of the significant policies that are being debated and discussed at the legislature. So, for example, you just mentioned, Jot, that this is probably like over 1/3 of the legislature was essentially new coming into this session. And one of the biggest policies that was debated and discussed last year was the cap and trade, extension of the cap and trade program, which has been around, I should know it off the top of my head, but for a while. And it's a complex program, and it has a lot of moving parts to it. And so I believe only 3 legislators had been there, you know what I mean, when the last extension happened under the Brown administration. And so you are trying to talk about extending or even making changes to a program like that has been, again, around for many years here in California as one of our key primary environmental programs that we have. And you're having to go out and explain to 1/3 of the legislature what cap and trade, is and how it works and how it operates before you even get to the point of talking about changing it or extending it or kind of what that does to the market. So it's just a matter of like a huge kind of education on some of these really complex policies that just makes advocating much more difficult. It's much more time intensive.
Yeah, I mean, we all have teams of lobbyists that
Yeah.
have to go educate legislators, the new ones, every year. And in the old days, it used to be like 10 new legislators, and now a third every election is new, and they're scrambling around trying to explain to them, right? It's like trying to explain how a watch works in 5 minutes. Every nuance of our respective industries, and it's tough.
The other thing that it does is it shifts the focus on power to the executive branch because they've got a whole army of folks that have been around for a number of years. This is the middle of the second term of this governor. And that puts the legislature in a difficult position to negotiate things. I mean, when you're brand new and you literally just figured out, who's in your office or where your office is, or you're trying to learn these complicated issues, you're at an incredible disadvantage with somebody that has a vision or ideas about major policy questions. So I think it's a real challenge for the legislature to be a co-equal branch of government when they just don't have the experience.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brian. The only thing I was going to add is that this is going to sound a little whiny, so maybe it is, but the three of you all have constituent presence in every part of the state, and I don't. So most of those new legislators come from urban California, from Southern California, and from Northern California, not so much from ag areas. And so that just the sheer numbers just compound the challenge we've always had, which is to find a way to connect with, educate, and ultimately persuade new legislators who come from highly urbanized areas that have no agriculture, no farming. They grew up knowing nothing about farming, and they may have preconceived notions from certain nonprofit activist groups when they get to Sacramento, and then we have to try and undo those myths. But that's just compounded the challenge. Now, on the upside to all of that, we have found some of the new members from urban California who want to become advocates for California farming and food production. They want to get into the food discussion around nutrition, particularly, but some other issues as well. And so there is some opportunity there. But just from a workload perspective, Jot, to your point, in the old days, we all remember, it was like you said, 10 new members to go educate. It ain't like that anymore. And so it definitely has put the pressure on.
Yeah. When you talk about the challenge of, highly sort of urban areas and lawmakers educating them, I immediately thought of Dianne Feinstein from San Francisco, who, as a U.S. Senator, took up, the cause for California ag. I mean, pretty significantly.
She did. She spent more
It
time
was
in
right.
the San Joaquin Valley than any senator, probably before or since. Although I have to say, Senator Schiff is spending a lot of time with our people in the San Joaquin Valley and on the Central Coast. So,
Smart politics.
yeah, it's good politics. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thanks. We'll continue the conversation next week, and appreciate you all joining our podcast.